าพการศึกษาที่เท่าเทียมบทบาทสำคัญของการพัฒนาทักษะและนิสัยการอ่านในช่วงวัยประถมศึกษาดิฉันขอเล่าประวัติของท่านวิทยากรให้ทุกท่านได้ทราบโดยสังเขปนะคะดร.ทีจินกลานค่ะปัจจุบันท่านดำรงตำแหน่งเป็นผู้ประสานงานด้านสิทธิการศึกษาภายใต้คณะกรรมการแห่งชาติด้านการพิทักษ์สิทธิเด็กของประเทศอินเดียค่ะท่านมีประสบการณ์การทำงานด้านการศึกษาร่วมกับภาครัฐและองค์กรพัฒนาเอกชนระหว่างประเทศมายาวนานกว่า 20 ปีนะคะโดยเฉพาะอย่างยิ่งในด้านการพัฒนาโครงการกระบวนการทำงานและกรอบนโยบายด้านการศึกษาระดับประถมท่านมีความเชี่ยวชาญในด้านการจัดการและปรับปรุงพัฒนาคุณภาพการศึกษาและเพิ่มพูนประสิทธิภาพในการเรียนรู้ของนักเรียนการส่งเสริมการรู้หนังสือของเด็กวัยเริ่มเรียนการพัฒนาศักยภาพครูการดูแลเด็กที่ประสบปัญหาด้านต่างๆและการศึกษาแบบพหุภาษาดร.ทีเป็นผู้ริเริ่มจัดทำแผนงานพัฒนาและโครงการกิจกรรมด้านการอ่านที่เน้นในเรื่องของการพัฒนาทักษะการอ่านและนิสัยรักการอ่านในกลุ่มเด็กนักเรียนมีผลงานหนังสือด้านการศึกษาระดับประถมที่ได้รับการตีพิมพ์จำนวน2 เล่มและงานเขียนอีกมากมายค่ะในช่วงท้ายของการบรรยายนะคะท่านใดมีคำถามสามารถยกมือนะคะถามได้เลยนะคะหรืออาจจะเขียนคำถามลงบนกระดาษที่เราเตรียมเอาไว้ให้บนโต๊ะแล้วก็ส่งให้กับเจ้าหน้าที่ของเราค่ะจะถามเป็นภาษาไทยหรือภาษาอังกฤษได้เลยเพราะว่าเรามีล่ามอยู่กับเราตลอดเวลานะคะแล้วก็ในโอกาสนี้ดิฉันขอเรียนเชิญดร.ทีจินกลานค่ะผู้ประสานงานด้านสิทธิการศึกษาภายใต้คณะกรรมการแห่งชาติด้านการพิทักษ์สิทธิเด็กประเทศอินเดียกับการบรรยายพิเศษในหัวข้อคุณภาพการศึกษาที่เท่าเทียมบทบาทสำคัญของการพัฒนาทักษะและนิสัยการอ่านในช่วงวัยประถมศึกษาค่ะขอเสียงปรบมือให้ท่านวิทยากรด้วยค่ะ
Good morning, everyone. President, members, and staff of TK Park and OKMD, and all distinguished delegates. It's my honor to be here today to be speaking to this august audience on this issue of reading. I've been working in the area of language education and reading for almost 20 years. And looking at what is being presented here, there's a lot of presentations around libraries and books. So I thought I would focus more on what a primary school can do in terms of ensuring reading skills and reading habit. So my focus is going to be what happens inside the school and inside the classroom. I was happy to see that in Thailand, I was on the net and I saw there's a lot of discussion happening around reading issues. And of course, TK Park is at the front of many of these debates. The fact that Thai children do not read too many books in a year, the fact that students are taught to read carefully, word by word, and there's not that much of a focus on comprehension and a critical reading of texts. The fact that the Ministry of Education is starting a project or has already started a project to promote almost 80,000 community libraries and trying to aim for a much higher readership among students. And this is a decade for promoting reading in Thailand. So I think these are very welcome things that are happening here. There's a concern about reading. And this is not happening in many countries, I must say that. I come from South Asia, though I worked a lot in Southeast Asia as well, but this is not happening elsewhere. What I'm going to talk about is, first, what is reading? What should we understand by reading? What is the importance of being able to read well in primary education? What is the present crisis in many countries around reading and reading achievements? And in the end, what can the primary school do better so that children read well and develop a reading habit? Is that too fast? You think, or it's okay? Okay, fine. So we'll start with what is reading, and that I think is very crucial because sometimes we consider reading to be just to be able to read. But reading is actually, in terms of, it is a complex process. It's a cognitive process that involves analyzing, thinking, processing information, interacting with the text. It's not just being able to decode and read. And the most important thing, of course, is to be able to make meaning out of the text. Why do we read? We read basically to be able to understand and make meaning. That must be remembered. And often in schools, when language is being taught or reading is being taught, this most important aspect of reading is not emphasized as much. So reading basically means reading fluently with understanding. And the understanding is not just a superficial understanding, that we understand at some very superficial level what is there in the text, but a deeper understanding. And therefore, I want to spend 1 minute on trying to talk about what are the different levels of comprehension and understanding of a text. Suppose we were to take some simple story. I'm saying this is, let's say, for grade 2, let's say, or grade 2 or 3. Jaidi is a child who's going to a forest, finds a bear, gets very scared, suddenly decides that I will lie down motionless as if not alive. The bear comes there, looks at the child, smells, and goes away thinking the child is dead. And the child is saved. Now in this, if this is a story which is being done in classroom, I mean it will be done differently, but there can be different levels of questions and comprehension. One which we call very simple direct recall. What is there in the text itself? What is the name of the boy? Where was he going? The answer is exactly there in the text. And a lot of these questions are asked in our language classrooms. But if we go forward and say, thinking about some analysis or some inference, why did the boy decide to lie motionless? Why did the boy decide to act as if he was dead? The higher level of comprehension would be relating this story to some prior knowledge. What could have happened if the boy did not lie down as if he was dead? So then the child has to, the answer is not in the story itself. The child has to think. And the higher order of questioning could be trying to express an opinion and go beyond the text completely. For example, describe a time when you were scared. This is the story, but when you, as a reader or a child of grade 2, was very scared. Now that requires a child to think, look at their own experiences, and say or write in an open-ended manner. What happens in primary education in most countries is this, that the focus in the language classroom is mainly on a very superficial understanding of the text, and we don't encourage the child to go and question many things, critical analysis. And that is possible. We think, many times teachers think that a child is ready for these kind of deeper questions only in grade 4 or 5. That's not true. If we stimulate the child, if we ask a lot of questions, a child is able to think through even at an early stage. That's very important. So I said, reading basically we can say it's reading fluently with complete understanding. So two parts to it very broadly, fluency and comprehension. Fluency means to be able to read with a reasonable speed and accuracy without making too many mistakes. Now, this particular graph is showing that fluency on the x-axis here, we've got correct words read per minute. The correct words read per minute basically means how many words a child is able to read per minute. And on the y-axis is how many questions does the child answer correctly. So a child is asked to read a passage, and then what is recorded is how well the child read the passage, with what speed and correctness, and how many questions could the child answer. And this straight line that you see for grade 3, almost grade 5 also, means that as a child's fluency increases, the child is also able to answer the comprehension questions better. Especially at a younger age, in early grades, fluency is very strongly linked to comprehension. So a child who reads slowly or haltingly is not also able to understand the text well. And there is a reason for it. there's a lot of research in neuroscience which says that if you don't read fast enough, fast doesn't mean speed reading, basically fast 50, 60, 70 words a minute, then you would tend to forget what you read at the beginning of the sentence. You would go towards, the child would go towards the end of the sentence and not remember what was read at the beginning of the sentence. And there is a reason that neuroscience research has given for this. Our brains have something called a working memory. It's very simple, though the diagram looks complicated. Our brains have a working memory which is very limited. A working memory is a place where all that we see or read comes first. It's there only for about 10 to 12 seconds. It gets processed there and then it is lost unless it is understood and goes into long-term memory. Now the time for that is very short, just a few seconds. And what neuroscience research says is that a child, anyone, can actually take in about 7 plus minus 2 pieces of information. They could be letters, they could be words, in those 12 seconds. Now the point is, if a child is not reading well or not reading fast enough, by the time the child, in these 12 seconds, if the child is able to get in only 2 or 3 words because the child is reading slowly, that student would forget what was read at the beginning of the sentence and therefore cannot make meaning. So the limitation, why one has to develop good reading fluency, basically is derived from the fact that our working memories are very limited, and therefore we have to try and put in as much information as possible into the working memory as quickly as possible. And therefore it's important to be able to read fluently. And so if there's a child who's reading only 2 letters and slowly trying to combine letters, trying to combine more letters and words, very little information is going into the working memory. So what is our effort? Our effort should be that a child, anyone for example, if I learn a new language also, I should be able to slowly be able to read bigger chunks or bigger packages. From letters, I should proceed to letters combined with vowel sounds, then words, phrases. So if I can read quickly in 12 seconds, then there is enough space to be able to understand that, and what you read earlier is not lost. So that's why ability to read fluently means basically we are increasing the number of chunks or packets of information that go into our working memory, which helps us understand. So fluent readers, those who are fluent, their concentration is not on decoding. Decoding means reading each letter and trying to make up the words and the sounds. But they are able to concentrate more on meaning, because reading for them is easy. It doesn't take any effort to read. So where is the brain attention focused? The brain attention gets focused on making meaning. And that's why it's very important. I'll give you an example of a child. How do we get the sound here? A child in early grade 2 who's reading fairly fluently. This is an Indian language. And this child was able to answer many questions. However, readers who can't read very fluently, and children, we are saying, as one of the speakers had said, you have to start early. It's not about, you can't catch up later. So those who can't read fluently, their attention is focused only on trying to read the words, and the meaning then gets lost. Same school, same classroom, there's another child. So again, this child, the whole brain attention is focused on trying to read rather than making meaning. So one of the key things, this is not the most important, but the most, it's a necessary condition, is that fluent, almost automatic reading helps in understanding. So in the first few grades of primary school, the focus should really be on ensuring that the child is able to read well, read quickly, with accuracy, of course with comprehension. I want to introduce one more concept. Our focus should be that at the end of primary school, after grades 5 or 6, a child should become an independent reader. And what I mean by independent reader is, one, the child should have appropriate literacy skills, skills of reading and writing, and a habit of reading. And these two put together ensures there's lifelong learning. So an independent reader is one who would read without guidance, who would be able to, who has a habit of reading, would read on their own and then use their reading for learning. So the focus of primary education, in fact, my firm belief is that if primary education can at least help in one thing, it should be on being able to read, to become an independent reader with a desire to read and read with full understanding. Therefore, what I'm saying is independent reader is someone who's got strong literacy skills on the left-hand side here. And literacy skills, as we know, is fluency as well as comprehension. Comprehension is understanding, strong understanding, plus a habit of reading. Both have to be there. And if these two are there, then we are sure that throughout life, that child will be a lifelong learner. And as all of you know, reading skills and reading habit is very closely linked. It's a virtuous cycle. The one who reads more develops better reading skills. And if a child has better reading skills, he or she tends to read more. So they're all very linked. So when we work towards improving reading skills, habits, it's a good foundation to develop a reading habit. And if we develop a strong reading habit, skills will automatically improve slowly. So there is enough research to say that reading skills and reading habit are very closely linked. I like this quote. This is from a research in Papua New Guinea, which says that if we, in primary school, or anyone, if we help develop good literacy skills, reading skills, let's say. Reading skills means to be able to read well, with understanding. It's like giving them, showing them how to drive. They've learned how to drive, but they don't have any petrol, no gas to be able to go on. However, if we can give someone the reading habit, then we ensure that the person has fuel for all her life. So that's going to take the person far, because the person then has a desire to read, will locate books and be able to read. So reading skills are very important, but habit is actually very crucial, because otherwise it's not enough for a child to go on in future. So taking from that definition, and that's where we end our first section on what is reading. Independent reader is able to read with understanding, right? With understanding is very important. Reading is never without understanding. It doesn't make any sense. And that person is able to apply reading and writing skills to learning, to be able to use them for learning. And the third, motivated to read and enjoys reading. If these three come together in a package, especially during the primary school stage, my focus is on what a primary school can do. So to be able to read with understanding, to be able to use that reading in learning, and to be motivated to read more and more. That's the package. If I'm not saying home doesn't have a role. Definitely, public libraries, community libraries have a strong role. My focus today is on what a primary school can do. So this is broadly what reading is all about. Coming to the second part of it, which is also the theme of this conference, is reading for equity. Why is reading so important for for equity purposes. And I'll start with the whole concept of language and then come to reading. Language is more than a subject. In some of the countries I've worked in, language is just taught, for example, Thai here, or Nepali in Nepal, is just taught as another subject. There are 5 or 6 subjects. But we must remember that language is a medium of thought. It's a medium of understanding. It's a medium of all cognition. It's not about just teaching a subject or teaching a few textbooks. Language is what builds understanding in a person. It cannot, it's the key to all future learning. If a child is not able to read and write with understanding, future learning is not likely to happen. And it's the foundation for equitable learning. Those children who cannot read well and those who are reading very well, if there's a gap, that gap is going to continue. And that's a problem. Therefore, reading is so crucial for equity, especially in the early primary grades. Anyway, from primary education, what is the most important expectation is that the child should be able to read and write well. Most parents expect that a child, once she is in primary school, should be able to do this. And if a child is not able to read and write well, the opportunity to learn is missed, because a lot of learning after that, whether it's textbooks or other books, depends upon reading. So reading, as all of us know, is really a foundational skill. It's like a foundation based on which a lot of formal education, all of formal education depends afterwards. Because reading is comprehension and learning. So any child who doesn't learn to read well and early cannot do well at school. And it's seen very clearly that if a child is a poor reader at the beginning of grade 1, the child continues to be a poor reader even at the end of primary school, 5 or 6. And this is very often called as the Matthew effect. In the Bible, there's a saying which is, the poor get poorer and the rich get richer. So if a child is poor in reading in early grades, they can never catch up. The gap continues to widen as we go on to grades. So it's very important that in the early grades, there's a lot of emphasis on children reading well with understanding. This is, of course, common sense. Children who learn to read late or read slowly will never become advanced readers. They cannot understand textbooks of their grade, may affect their schooling as well, and they also will have negative aspects about reading. So that's the second part. Why is reading so important for equity purposes? There is a crisis in reading across the world. In fact, I was looking at some results from Thailand, and I find that children are actually reading better in Thailand than many other countries surrounding you also. I've worked a lot in Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. So poor reading skills, the two problems are poor reading skills and then poor reading habit, these two aspects. All across the world, children are not reading well enough. Reading skills achievements, these are grade appropriate tests. If you give a test, which is a standardized test, which basically is about, can a child read in grade 3 or grade 4 a text which is meant for that grade? India, you can see, is the worst, where I come from. 50% children in grade 5 could only read a grade 2 text. So there is a crisis everywhere about how well children can read. They are definitely behind their grade level expectations. I'd like you to focus just on that yellow band. This is the results from 4 countries in South Asia. Focus on the yellow band, which is basically around reading fluency. This is a 60-word passage which was given to children. 60 words, small paragraph, and they were asked to read it in 1 minute. Now, if you see, about 30, 15, 10, if you see the numbers in black, they are the numbers of words read correctly per minute by average, on an average. This is the mean score of children. Very low. That means children are reading only 30 to 20, 30 words a minute. And the figures in bracket that you see is, don't worry about it, it's something called standard deviation, which means that there's a lot of variation. Some children read well, some are not able to read well. So there's a big difference within a class also. And this is one class in Nepal in grade 2, and what you will find here is On the y-axis here is number of words per minute. These are children here. In the same class, there are children who are almost at zero level. There are some children around 5 to 10 words per minute. They can read 5 to 10 correct words per minute. And some are around 30, 35, 40 words per minute. So classrooms are very diverse, and that's a big issue for teachers. You've got classrooms where some children are good at reading, some cannot read well. This is just one classroom and 20 children inside the classroom, how different their rates of reading are. What we will not be probably talking about at great length today is that children who have a different first language, a language that they speak at home, really face a double disadvantage. And there's a lot of research to say that they do not become advanced readers unless something special is done for them. So that's something which we will not go into detail. So that was the reading skills part of it. Reading skills, there is a crisis in most parts of the world. And the other part is we've been discussing to be an independent reader is reading skills plus reading habit. Now reading habits are also poor and various reasons for it. Reading is not promoted, either at home or school. Learning language not fun at school. This was mentioned by one of the speakers that language learning should be fun. It's all about memorization, and therefore children do not get an interest in reading. In many schools, in most parts of the world, there's not enough access to good books. And often the focus of teaching or focus of classrooms is only on the textbooks and the curriculum. Teachers will not, and it's not their fault also, it's the system. That anything outside, storybook in Bangladesh we tried introducing storybooks, and that storybooks, no. Storybooks cannot be brought into classrooms. That's bad. It will spoil the children. Now, the point here is this, that we must remember that all these are adding up to a lack of reading habit. Children spend 6 hours, 7 hours at school. And of course, we've got our internet and mobiles and other things, also TV. But there are reasons within the school that also result in a poor reading habit. So now I come to the third part of my presentation, which is what can primary education do? I'm going to focus on what can primary education, the school and the classroom do. It can be three things. One, a good reading instruction strategy, a good strategy to teach reading in the classroom. In the classroom, access to interesting and developmentally appropriate books, classroom as well as a school library. So that's the second part. So a teacher understands what are good ways of teaching reading and language. Second, have enough appropriate books. Often school libraries have books, but they are either far too high a level of children or not interesting. In India, where I come from, we had a big project to supply books to schools, and it was a bit politicized, so we had biographies of various leaders and all of that in grade 2 and grade 3, which really were not useful for children. So access to interesting books. And again, the third point, again within school, is the space, time and encouragement to read. Not just having books there, but actively encouraging children to read, providing them space and time to read at school. Of course at home also, but I am discussing school. So we'll begin by looking at the first one now, which is what is a good reading instruction strategy? What can be? What are some good elements of a reading instruction strategy? So we've looked at what is reading. Reading is basically reading fluently with understanding. We should have good reading skills as well as reading habit. And now we are looking at what can the primary school do to promote good reading skills and habit. Let me begin by the first point, which is language learning and reading can actually be fun, even if we are very focused on achieving certain standards. It can still be fun. And I have done some research mostly in South Asian countries, and we find that a lot of reading is about rote memorization, repetition, and copying. And that's also, in fact, in Vietnam, we have done some work that a lot of writing work is really about handwriting work. So there is no imagination involved, there's no thinking involved. So if we could focus the emphasis on rote memorization and repetition, and I'd like to show you a small clip from my country. class. I'll show you one more clip and then I'll just mention what. I was doing this research, no child was actually reading. They were just repeating after that child. When I went close to them, I have video clips, their fingers were in different locations. And they were just repeating that. So what is called reading is actually a time spent mainly on choral repetition. In our cultures, choral repetition is chanting or choral repetition is very common. So a lot of time which we say reading, now no child is learning to read through this process. And this takes about 20-25% of the classroom time. So I think just making reading fun by ensuring, we'll come to it, what other means. Focus on active learning. Again, this is very general. Classrooms are very, formal. There is just the teacher speaks, the children remain very quiet. That is not good for language learning, especially language learning. Language is about rich use of language in the classroom. And children have to use language. Who needs practice? Not the teacher. Practice is required by children to be able to use language. So the important point is focus on active learning, classrooms where children are speaking, children are reading, they're doing something active. And it's not always, not like this, but maybe the second one, where children are sitting in groups trying to read, doing something, and not just sitting without any this is one of my
मर्जी जहाँ मैं घूम नहीं सकता है ना उसकी आजादी सब छीन जाती है जब तुम्हारे को कमरे में बंद कर दे बिल्कुल बोले चुपचाप बैठ जाओ रोटी आलू नहीं देंगे ऐसे नहीं मिलेगी तुम्हारे को कोई एक गिलास पानी नहीं बैठो चुपचाप और तुम बोले मैं तो नहीं जाऊँ स्कूल रोज हिंदी मान को बाहर ही नहीं जाओगे आओगे क्या स्कूल तो तुम्हारी जब आपको बोलते हैं हाई तो एक जाने देते हैं है ना किसी को परेशानी वो करने देते हैं है ना तो अगर बंद कर देंगे तुम आओगे ही नहीं नहीं भाई मैं तो नहीं जाता मम्मी को बेंजी तो जाना ही नहीं देती हमको ऐसे ये कबूतर है चिड़िया है इनको बंद नहीं करना चाहिए वो अपनी मर्जी से कुछ नहीं खा सकते अपन देंगे तो खाएंगे और नहीं तो नहीं खाएंगे और भूखे होंगे चिल्लाते रहेंगे जब अपन बोलेंगे हाँ उसको भूख लग गई भाई अपन ध्यान नहीं देते तो वो स्वतंत्र रहेगा अच्छा रहेगा घूमेगा फिरेगा तो उसको
This is one of the best teachers I found in my research. This is again from India. She's very sincere, talks to children, but in an effort to explain to children, she speaks 70% of the time. And she's speaking in the local language, she's trying to make children understand, but when does a child actually learn the language? Is when the child also gets an opportunity to speak, to respond, to ask questions. She's very empathetic towards children, very sincere, very good. But again, her understanding is that I must explain to children, I must ensure that they understand, and therefore I have to talk. So that's, I think basically language, the understanding that language is learned through rich use of language by the learner is an issue. I have some other clips, but I'll tell you probably. What do you see from this clip? There's one child at the blackboard who's doing something. The others are doing nothing at that time. So the teacher is helping one child, but the others are not doing anything concrete, anything specific, no learning activity. So again, the point is that try to increase active learning time of children, which is general, not just for language, but just increase what's called time on task. Every child doing something related to the subject, something related to learning. That's important. And spend adequate time on actually reading. As I said, a lot of activities which we call reading is not reading. And so This is from a coordination of research in 3 countries, where you find, look at the activities here. Listening to the teacher, that's the first one. That's the percentage of time out of 100, how much time is spent on which activity. Copying from the blackboard or textbook is almost 15%. Repetition, which I showed you the video, is about 11-12%. Watching another student at the blackboard, like they were doing now, about 4% of the time goes in that. Speaking is very little, 1.4. Working with some teaching, learning materials, that's, having cards and reading materials, that's very limited. And no meaningful activity is a whole lot of time, and that is not because, that's because the teacher is there, but she is not able to engage everyone in meaningful activities. And what we did was to map every child and see how many children were doing what. So a lot of children were not doing anything meaningful for almost 40% of the time, which is getting lost. So we need to improve our general teaching practices. Of course, a lot of supplementary materials are needed. In some countries, there's a belief that textbook is the end of, must be, that's all. In Bangladesh, we had a problem. So also in Vietnam, we had a problem in introducing supplementary books to be used in the language time. So that became a big issue. And not just books, it's also about a lot of other materials, reading cards, word cards, stories, flip charts, books, a lot of other materials. And of course, having a print-rich classroom environment. A classroom environment which has got a lot of print around it helps children, motivates them to take up reading, and they would like to look at what it is, various materials that can be used. Some classrooms that have a lot of print around it. Okay. So now I mentioned that we are looking at 3 parts of what is a good way for schools to promote reading skills and reading habit. The first is a good reading instruction strategy. And we saw there that learning should be fun, a variety of activities should be used. It should not be only the teacher speaking, rich use of language. And then I come to the second part, which is again the reading instruction strategy. There should be balanced language instruction. What happens in many parts of the world is this, that language teaching focuses on teaching the parts, teaching about letters and words, reading correctly, pronouncing them correctly, and a lot of focus goes on accuracy and being able to read, and not enough on making meaning. And the point is, language learning is about, of course, being able to decode. Decode means to be able to see what is in the script and read it, but it's also and mainly about making meaning. So balanced teaching in the classroom means a teacher should be able to not just get children to understand what's there in the, to be able to read and read word by word well, but also meaning. So anytime, any language class should have both components. There should be a balance between both. This is very commonly known that a good reading strategy has got, it's called the big 7 of teaching of reading or language. Oral language development is very important. Sometimes we think, reading will develop if a child's oral language skills are also evolved. It's difficult to become a skilled or advanced reader if you do not have strong oral language comprehension. So oral language development, initially a lot of sound awareness, phonological awareness, what does each letter sound like, how do you combine sounds, phonics to be able to combine sounds and to be able to read words, fluency achievement, comprehension, as I said, is at the top, understanding, the one at the top, I'm not able to point out here, but okay. So comprehension is right at the top, and then of course vocabulary development and writing. So these are the big 7 of what should be included in when language is being taught or reading is being taught. Often what happens is the focus remains sometimes on phonics, and this oral language is neglected. There's not enough focus on comprehension. So a balanced approach to teaching of reading, where all these components are included, development of vocabulary, writing, reading and writing also reinforce each other. So it's important to remember that reading teaching of reading, teaching of language includes many things. So, what are the different components of a good reading or language instruction? One, the early grades are crucial, early grades, and I would say preschool is equally crucial. In Thailand, the coverage of preschool is actually better than a lot of other countries in Asia, but then there's a lot of difference in the nature of preschools. And preschool lays the foundation of language development. So when we say good language instruction, there should be the foundations of decoding. When you teach a child to start recognizing letters, it's not about recognizing letters first. Many things should happen before that. Emphasis on oral language, a lot of work with sounds, a lot of work with rhymes, etc. So foundations of decoding, we should spend enough time. Effective learning to decode strategies, to be able to, when you teach a child letters and combining sounds, to be able to form words, good processes should be used. I know that in Thailand the position is better than this, but basically what's happening in many of these countries is that the letters are written on the board and children then repeat the letters. Now where is the practice to mix sound and shape, which is the essence of decoding? Enough practice for that. So improving the process of learning to decode, So then developing fluency in recognizing letters, syllables and words. Practice reading for fluency. Now, what happens is this, that if you do not have a lot of reading materials in the classroom, a child does not get a chance to practice fluency. They're beginning to read, but where are the materials to practice that? We've discussed a constant focus on comprehension should be there, and for comprehension there are many strategies. Often there is a belief that when I surveyed teachers, they said once a child can read, they will understand on their own. But it's not that. I think comprehension needs to be taught and encouraged on a regular basis. For example, that Jaivi story, the point is, can we ask deeper and deeper questions? Encourage children to try and understand higher and higher levels of comprehension. Comprehension can be taught in different ways. Ask questions, lot of questions of different types. Graphic organizers, so if there's a story, then the story can be put as, this character, this one, and relate the different parts, which helps a child understand and make a graphic map of what the story is about. Generating a lot of questions from children. Allow children to ask a lot of questions. Summarizing and retelling, asking a child to retell a story. That's a very great way of ensuring that the child has understood or not, using worksheets, etc. So it's important to use specific comprehension strategies in class and not just teach a lesson. We are not teaching a lesson. What is the objective of the lesson? The objective of the lesson is to get good reading skills, including comprehension. So there are a variety of strategies that can be used. May not have time, but for example, one of them is you can draw a Venn diagram and put different characters or events and say what is common between them, and get the children to do some exercise, maybe grade 3 or grade 4. That's definitely possible. You can talk about how event 1 is related to event 2 is related to event 3. Again, on the board, just trying to ensure that children understand this map of how things proceed. There are many other ways. So, sorry. Okay. Yeah. Okay. This one's causing a problem. No problem. So, adequate time for revision and practice. That's very important. Often teachers do not give enough time for to children to practice what they have learned and revise and consolidate. So teaching in small steps, going back again and again, ensuring that every child is able to revise and consolidate and learn what is being taught. Focus on struggling readers. See, what is our objective? Every child should be able to learn to read. It's about equity. We're talking about equity. We're not saying children who are advanced, who have a very good home environment, should read very well. Our objective is that every child should be able to read well, almost every child. So the focus on struggling readers is very important, and that requires an effort in the classroom, because as I showed you in the Nepal diagram, some children are at a low level, some medium, some high. So working with children at different levels is crucial, because we believe it's learning for all, reading for all. This we've already discussed, that it's important to acquire reading automaticity, to be able to become almost automatic in reading without an effort, because then what happens? Understanding is easy because you're not putting in enough effort to read. Regular assessment and tracking of progress, and of course generating an interest in reading. We said there's a big issue about children who have a different home language, which I'm not going to tackle here directly. So I come to the second part of the role of primary education. The first was a good reading instruction strategy. The second is access to developmentally appropriate books, preferably inside the classroom. And why is this necessary? Because in many parts of Asia, textbooks are often difficult and uninteresting. This is from Bangladesh. This is a grade 1 lesson, this is lesson number 41, which is after about 3 months of school, when a child is basically just beginning to recognize letters. See the very thick and heavy text here, and the expectation that the child would read this text is inappropriate. So textbooks are difficult and uninteresting. From Lao, this is a Lao grade 2 textbook. The themes are about nation, school, environment, morals. There's nothing which is interesting for the child. A story about animals, there's one or two. What does a child need when the child is just able to read? A number of very simple stories with limited text and lot of pictures. The Lao textbook has about 60 lessons in grade 2 with all these themes. Is it important to teach a child about morals and country and nation and monuments at that stage, or encourage a child to pick up reading skills by reading very interesting stories? So these are the kind of issues that are there in textbooks. So I'm making out a big case for reading materials to be inside the classroom for two objectives. One, of course, could be to support teaching itself. And the prime example of this is a project in Colombia called Escuela Nueva. Escuela Nueva means new school project. What they do is this: for every subject, there are some books in the classroom, and the teachers give an exercise to children to go to that corner where there are books and then look at the books to answer a question orally or in writing. So it's linked to the teaching and the curriculum, but also reading for pleasure. There should be books inside the classroom for reading for pleasure. And of course, we require a variety of graded materials, variety of materials. It can't be, if children have different levels of reading, different interests in reading, we should have a variety of materials which are graded of different levels. The textbook, the books that are available have to be enjoyable and worth reading. Children will read only those books which are really interesting for them. Illustrations are very important in a good book, in a good story book. And the last one is most crucial for me, based on the research that has happened, that the difficulty level of the text should be matched to the child's reading level. There's no point putting books in the classroom that are higher than the children's level. They will feel frustrated and will not read. So it's very important to understand what is the level of children, what kind of books are appropriate, and in one classroom, you may not have children at same level. You'll have children at different levels. So a variety of books should be there. I probably won't go into this, but books, in reading research, there are 3 levels of reading. One is called frustration level of reading. If the book is very difficult, children read very haltingly, word by word, and that causes frustration. An instructional level book is, which a child can read, will make a few mistakes but requires some guidance. An independent level book is one which is easy to read and gives a lot of practice for fluency. And we should focus initially on a lot of books of the third type, of independent reading type. So as I said, graded reading materials for different reading levels inside the classroom, and we don't have to follow a Dewey system of classification there. We have to have simple color codes of 3 or 4 levels of reading, just have red, blue, green, yellow, whatever, and ensure that children can go to a book which is their own level inside the classroom. You need books for emergent readers which they can just flip through. Emergent reader is a reader who's just beginning to recognize letters. Early and beginning readers books, very often in many countries, I'm not so sure about Thai language, there are not enough books for a child who's just beginning to read. That's important. Just beginning to read with just a few words and a few sentences, and they're graded so that a child is encouraged to keep reading. And then of course we've discussed fluency practice. So a variety of books are required inside the classroom. They have to be interesting with good pictures. These are some pictures of a classroom library, but also a school library. I think what's very important is to also have a school library. My experience with school libraries in South Asia has been that, also in Southeast Asia has been that just a library is not enough. There should be someone who can do some small activities with the books and with children, at least for some time, once a week. Take out the books, talk to children about what they're reading, get the children to talk about the books they have read, do some read aloud or storytelling. So a library should not be just a place to go and get books issued or borrowed. And also very crucial is to be able to take books home regularly and during holidays. In some of the countries where we did research, there are summer holidays or winter holidays of 2 to 3 months, 2 months. And that causes a big learning loss. Children who have learned to read, actually they go, and those who come from deprived backgrounds, their homes don't have too many books, it's very important to provide access to books during holidays. And the school library could be a place where they could come and, if possible, or community libraries as is being talked about here in Thailand. So it's important that books are available to a child year round and not just during school hours. So that's the last part then of what I said is role of primary education. The first is a good reading instruction strategy on the top, access to books here, and then it's not enough to just have books, to ensure that there is space and time to discuss the books, give time to read the books. So school can have a dedicated time for reading during language teaching, and this we've done in several countries, that language teaching time, if it's 1 hour, after 40 minutes, the next 20 minutes are for reading by children. So you ensure that books are distributed to children according to their own levels in the language class when the teacher is there, and then you get time to read during that time. There's a time for library-based reading, of course, reading during assembly or whatever common school functions are there, organizing reading events in schools, book clubs in schools. But I'm focusing a lot on providing time for reading during the language class in the classroom. That gives a clear impression that reading is important for language learning. You're already having a program for trying to flood books in rural areas, remote areas. So it's very important to provide a large number of books to populations which are deprived of books. And the last is that often our school systems do not recognize that reading for pleasure is important. Reading for pleasure is as important for improving skills as teaching of reading. When the child reads a book at her level independently, that improves reading skills. So this recognition through people in the education system, those who are responsible for teacher education, to say reading for pleasure is important, it's really a very strong step towards ensuring that children can learn to read well. End with a thought that probably most countries should have something like a national reading mission for schools or primary schools, where all 3 elements are included, which is instruction strategy, books available, and space and time to read. Thank you so much.
ต้องขอบคุณดร.ทีจินกรานนะคะผู้ประสานงานด้านสิทธิการศึกษาภายใต้คณะกรรมการแห่งชาติด้านการพิทักษ์สิทธิเด็กประเทศอินเดียเป็นอย่างสูงค่ะวันนี้เราเริ่มต้นกันในเรื่องที่ยากพอสมควรนะคะกับกลยุทธ์และก็เทคนิคที่ใช้ในกระบวนการสอนการอ่านและเขียนให้กับเด็กเล็กๆซึ่งเป็นกระบวนการที่ซับซ้อนแล้วก็ต้องใช้ความสามารถเฉพาะบุคคลมากๆเลยค่ะดังที่ดร.ทีได้กรุณาแบ่งปันมุมมองและประสบการณ์ที่มีค่าของท่านกับเราเอาไว้การส่งเสริมทักษะการอ่านและนิสัยรักการอ่านในช่วงการศึกษาระดับประถมศึกษาเนี่ยต้องใช้ความพยายามนะคะมีเทคนิคมีกลยุทธ์การเรียนการสอนที่ดีตระหนักถึงความสำคัญของการอ่านว่าเป็นทักษะพื้นฐานในระบบการศึกษาการศึกษาเพื่อปวงชนควรหมายถึงการเรียนรู้เพื่อทุกคนค่ะซึ่งหมายความว่านักเรียนทุกคนในโรงเรียนประถมศึกษาควรบรรลุผลการเรียนรู้ที่เหมือนกันเมื่อการศึกษามีคุณภาพที่เท่าเทียมกันก็จะทำให้เยาวชนมีความเสมอภาคในการเรียนรู้แล้วก็ย่อมนำไปสู่สังคมที่เสมอภาคยิ่งขึ้นค่ะในช่วงนี้เรามีเวลาสำหรับการถามคำถามนะคะท่านใดมีคำถามสามารถยกมือได้เลยนะคะเดี๋ยวเจ้าหน้าที่เราจะเดินไปหาทางมุมนู้นเลยค่ะถามเป็นภาษาอังกฤษหรือภาษาไทยก็ได้เลยนะคะแนะนำตัวก่อนเลยนะคะ
Yes, I'm working with we are happy and we are promoting book reading. And I agree with you so many points that the first point, no story book for children in the class. That really very grateful for children because the children really like to read enjoyable thing, and when they are denied enjoyable thing and they are forced to read a textbook, that really hunting the children. The second thing I think is the problem of the plight of the language of each country. Some countries are having problem of do not have the proud to be proud of their own language. They are looking at the other language. In Thailand, we are having that problem. The teacher who teach Thai language do not have very good status as a teacher who teach English or teach mathematics. And when you don't have the proud of your own language, how could you create proudness of the language in children? So this is the problem. If you want to encourage reading, and in your point, you say the language is very important. It's just like the tool to reading. So I would like to get your answer, so comment about the first thing about the no text, no story book in class, and the second about the plight of the language, of the local language. Thank you very much.
One by one? I completely agree that storybooks should be a part of the language classroom and inside the classroom, and that can be integrated with the curriculum, because fluency cannot come only from just reading the textbook. So I think the education system, the Ministry of Education has to see that simple storybooks are included as a part of the curriculum, and dedicated time. I was saying that you give 15-20 minutes every day to read storybooks, but storybooks which are at different levels, which help a child improve reading skills. So it's all related to learning language. It's a part of the curriculum, so it should become a part of the curriculum. On the second point, I completely understand your point. Not just Thailand, in my own country, there is so much emphasis on English, and English is important. I'm not saying that people should not, they should learn English, but there's so much research to say that to learn English, you have to first learn your own language very well, to be able to express yourself, to be able to read and write in that very well, because your thinking process can be stimulated only if you understand things. So what we are fighting in India, and it's India also, English is introduced from grade 1. What we are saying is, it's fine to have oral English, English exposure to English, but it's very crucial that children learn to read and understand in their mother tongue. They're able to think and understand all the subjects. Yes, English will definitely come on. And there's enough research to say that the stepping stone for learning a foreign language, a second language, is your own language. So I think we should focus on that, but also ensure that slowly English is introduced by qualified people. And Thai should have a pride of place in the classroom as the only way our children can become creative, innovative, and thinking people. They cannot become thinking people if they start to learn only in English. It can never happen.
โอเคค่ะมีคำถามต่อไปไหมคะถ้ามีก็ยกมือขึ้นได้เลยนะคะทั้งภาษาอังกฤษแล้วก็ภาษาไทยก็ได้ค่ะหรือว่าจะเขียนเป็นคำถามแล้วส่งให้กับเจ้าหน้าที่ของเราก็ได้นะคะถ้าไม่มีก็นะคะก็ไม่เป็นไรนะคะเอกสารจากการประชุมนะคะหลังจากนี้ไปประมาณสักไม่เกิน2 สัปดาห์ค่ะท่านสามารถดาวน์โหลดได้ที่เว็บไซต์ tcr2013.tkpark.or.th นะคะค่ะงั้นช่วงนี้ต้องขอบพระคุณวิทยากรของเรานะคะขอเสียงปรบมือให้กับดร.ทีจินกรานด้วยค่ะ